I'm happy because Brandon Weichert's about to educate us on some things, as he often does. Joining me now, wonderful author, national security man, Brandon Weichert. Hey, Brandon, why is the Navy going down to Venezuela?
Well, thanks for having me. As always, the Navy has decided to flex some muscles in the face of Nicolas Maduro. Ostensibly, it's to help the Trump administration conduct its anti-drug cartel operations, but I suspect that it is much more than that. I believe that the Trump administration is attempting to conduct some form of regime change in Caracas by ousting Nicolas Maduro.
Oh, well, that always goes well. Okay, let's rewind quite a bit, because I realize everybody comes at the news from different levels of understanding. Venezuela, how did they get to where they got now? Maduro, what's the deal with them? Pretend like I don't know squat. What's going on there?
Well, 40 years ago, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. It is one of the great oil producers. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, they went through a political revolution led by Hugo Chavez, who was a colonel in the Venezuelan army. He was a socialist, and he overthrew the government and installed a radical socialist regime with himself as the leader. And ever since the 2000s, it has been run by either Hugo Chavez, who died in 2013, and then after that it was his right-hand man, Nicolas Maduro, who took over. They have funded drug cartel operations. They're a narco-terrorist regime. They have funded human trafficking. They have sent Tren de Aragua, which is a paramilitary force, into the United States through our broken border. And there may or may not be some evidence that their company, run by Venezuelan national Smartmatic, may be involved in the Philippines and other countries in manipulating the votes. It's an election counting machine software. And in fact, the CEO is currently indicted, I believe, in a Miami court. So there's a lot of problems with Venezuela we've had going back several decades. Every president has talked about how much of a problem it is, but because it's an oil producer, we are in a bind. We need to have business relations with Venezuela, but the regime as it stands hates the United States.
Okay, so we are currently purchasing oil from Venezuela?
So there was a special carve-out that was allowed after Chavez took over. The only U.S. company that was allowed to directly drill for oil consistently in Venezuela was Chevron. This became a fight about 3 or 4 months ago in the Trump administration. You had people like Rick Grenell. You had people like him versus Marco Rubio. Rick Grenell was saying, hey, President Trump, renew the licenses. It's easy, quick access to oil. All we have to do is pay the Venezuelans off, and they'll look the other way while we mine for it or drill for it. And Marco Rubio was saying, hey, that money is directly feeding these organizations in Venezuela that are sending drugs, human traffickers, illicit arms, Tren de Aragua into the United States through our broken southwestern border. We got to cut them off. So there was a temporary cutoff about 2 months ago. It was a big fight. Trump sided with Rubio, and many people, myself included, believe this was part of a larger move to slowly build up a regime change operation. Don't forget also, Venezuela's regime has allowed the Chinese, the Russians, and even Iran into our hemisphere for the last 20 years. And also Venezuela, if you deal with Venezuela, you take care of that regime, then Trump has a clearer shot at taking the Panama Canal Zone, which is something that he has wanted to do. Venezuela is a complicating factor in that mission as it's currently run. So that's the logic. Now, I don't know if that's what we should be doing, but that is the logic behind, I think, what Trump is doing.
Okay. Actually, we'll get to the Panama Canal thing in a few moments. Can you elaborate more on Venezuela and being a narco-terrorist state? Because they're never brought up when it comes to cartels. People obviously know about Colombia, and they dang sure know about Mexico. What's Venezuela's vested interest in the Yayo?
So Venezuela has a state-owned cartel. members of the Venezuelan parliament, the current head of the Venezuelan parliament, the vice president, probably Maduro himself, several key Venezuelan generals, and leaders of the Venezuelan intelligence operation. They all run, excuse me, they all run Cartel of the Suns. It's one of the largest cartels in the world, and it is completely state-owned and backed. So it is a state-owned cartel. This is very different from Colombian cartels. It's even different from how Mexico's cartels operate. In Venezuela, the regime and the cartel is one. And then, of course, there's also Tren de Aragua, which, as I said, it's described as a prison gang in Venezuela that has these sort of transnational ties. In fact, Tren de Aragua is a paramilitary force. I live in Florida. I deal a lot with Venezuelan expats. All of them tell me TDA, Tren de Aragua, is a paramilitary force that Maduro deploys to go after things like Venezuelan political dissidents in America. So that's what Venezuela is doing. And a lot of the Cartel of the Suns actually does business and supports the Colombian cartels. They do business and help out with certain Mexican cartels, all as part of this feeder program to get their product and the human traffic up into the broken southwestern border with the United States.
Okay, now you mentioned China, you mentioned Russia. In what way do they invite them into our hemisphere?
Well, the Russians, through the Wagner Group, which is their big, supposedly private military contracting group. It's actually an arm of the Russian government, though, and the Russian military staffs it and Russian intelligence supports it. They have massive contracts with Caracas. They provide a lot of the protection for Venezuela's leaders. I suspect they provide protection and conduct operations on behalf of both the Venezuelan government and the Cartel of the Suns. The Russians are allowed to base nuclear-capable blackjack bombers in Venezuela. They have repeatedly landed them there over the last decade. They're in fact talking about sending these Shahed 136 Iranian-made drones that the Russians use in Ukraine. The Russians are talking about sending them over to Venezuela to fight the Americans. The Chinese, they have these massive contracts for access to Venezuela's oil and rare earth minerals. And obviously they like to destabilize America's leading role in the Western Hemisphere. It's also part of China's control of the Panama Canal, as well as their major presence in the Caribbean Sea, which is basically now a Chinese lake. And so Venezuela is in the middle of is the epicenter of all of this, inviting the American enemies into our hemisphere to undermine us. That regime is.
Brandon, do you have, I didn't even get to the friggin' Panama Canal or Venezuela's military capability or anything. Do you have time for one more segment with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
We still have Brandon Weichert educating us on some things when it comes to Venezuela. Apparently the Navy is heading down there. The Marines are heading down there. Before we get to what's heading down there, how are they militarily? At some point in time, as you said, they were one of the wealthiest countries in the world. What kind of military are we dealing with here?
Well, it's pretty much a, conventional force-wise, it's not that impressive. I would argue even the Houthi rebels of Yemen are probably more impressive with their anti-access area denial capabilities. The Venezuelans are late to the party in terms of building up their own A2AD capacity. The Russians, like I said, are helping them do that. But again, it's late in the game. They do have these Maoist-like militias that are, the Bolivaran, militias, which are like the people's militias. And Maduro is claiming he's mobilizing 4.5 million of these militiamen to fight Los Gringos. I'm very skeptical that he can mobilize that many. And even if he can, this kind of reminds me of the Fedayeen in Iraq. They really weren't that impressive at the end of the day. Obviously, Iraq itself was a disaster, but actually knocking out Saddam was pretty straightforward. I think the same thing is true of Maduro. I would just posit, if the Trump administration is playing its cards right, it needs to remember it's not dealing with a jihadi-type leadership that wants to go meet their maker by fighting to the death. They're dealing with basically a narco-criminal gang that just wants the biggest slice of the pie they can get. if the Trump administration flexes its muscle with these military maneuvers off of Venezuela's coast and signals to some element of Maduro's government, we will leave you in place as long as you hand over Maduro and let us get the oil. I think that's a deal that some ambitious person or group working under Maduro might go for, and it could be relatively bloodless because, it is a jungle war, even though I don't think they're militarily on par with even, say, the Houthis in certain ways. A jungle ground war could get very dicey, especially because, numbers matter. 4.5 million guys, if they can get anywhere near that, that's going to be a problem for us. But I think there's a way we might be able to do this relatively bloodlessly. I just hope the Trump administration is, reaching out to certain people in the regime who might be willing to part ways with Maduro in exchange for remaining in power.
Yeah, jungle warfare friggin' sucks. Okay. All right, let's go to the Panama Canal because you brought that up, and I know Trump's been hot on that for a while. What do we have now as far as that situation goes, and what do we want?
Well, what we have now is basically the Chinese manage it. They have the two largest ports, one on the mouth of the Pacific side, one on the mouth of the Atlantic side, and then they're building these. My friend Michael Yan, who's an independent war reporter, he's been in Panama on and off for the last 2 years. He's actually taken pictures and posted them on his Substack of these bridges the Chinese are building across the Panama Canal. So the Chinese own major infrastructure. They have a huge footprint in the Panama Canal zone. Now, in peacetime, it seems relatively, insignificant because ships are still going through and whatnot. But with the Chinese managing the two sides of the Panama Canal and the locks of the Panama Canal, the Chinese could easily sabotage them in the event that a war between the United States and China broke out. And that could seriously cripple our ability to move naval forces and other assets from one side of the Americas, the Atlantic side, to the Pacific side, and vice versa, which would complicate our ability to deploy forces, say, to help protect Taiwan from a possible Chinese invasion.
So how do we handle that? We're not going to go down and bomb Chinese ports. How do we handle that?
So this was what Trump was talking about. He tried to leverage the trade war with China to get them to basically sell off the two properties, the big properties they have, to BlackRock. Setting aside my distaste for BlackRock, it didn't go anywhere because ultimately China has figured out that they have 90% of the world's rare earth mineral supply under their control, and all they have to do is whisper to Trump that we're going to cut you off like they did in April, and Trump will give them whatever they want, which is one of the reasons why he's dropped his calls to reclaim the Panama Canal Zone. Now, I don't think he's abandoned this mission. I think he's actually finding ways to basically completely surround the Panama Canal Zone and then choke it off from Chinese control. One of those ways would possibly be by taking Venezuela. He possibly has Colombians now on his side, and we could basically create a sort of encirclement of those two Chinese ports in Panama and maybe squeeze them and, if necessary, take them. But, we'll see. This is very dicey, and as long as China has those rare earth minerals under their belt, we're not going to do much to them.
Okay, finally, last question before I let you go. What exactly do we have around Venezuela right now as far as our military goes? What do we have? What are we sending?
Okay, so the Iwo Jima Amphibious Assault Group, which is Marines, I believe they're underway. They'll be there shortly. I think elements of that assault group are already there. That's about 4,500 Marines and sailors. You've got 3 Arleigh class Arleigh Burke class destroyers. They've got 96 vertical launch system cells that can pop off Tomahawk cruise missiles each. Then I suspect, I might get, this just is a theory, I suspect that we probably have a Virginia class nuclear-powered attack submarine operating off the coast. That brings additional Tomahawk land attack cruise missile capability and probably the ability to launch special forces elements from that submarine. So we've got a small flotilla there, and that's to say nothing of what the Trump administration is talking about doing with the Mexican drug cartels. So we are rapidly ramping up our force presence in our hemisphere for the first time in decades.
How about that? He is Brandon Weichert. I told you to go buy his books. You'll get a whole lot smarter. Brandon, thank you, my brother, as always. Very much appreciated.